Welcome to another episode of Corporate CPR, where we breathe life back into your organization, projects, and processes, giving you insights to recovery and avoiding corporate mortality events. Joining us today is Jake Jacobs. Jake Jacobs has had a vast career across many different industries, everything from nonprofit to working with companies like Ford, Kraft, and Marriott. He's even worked with the United States Army and Navy. It's very quite the diverse set of clients that you've had, Jake. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, so what I would say, Jana, is the people that I work with have one thing in common. They're frustrated. They're frustrated with change, and for three reasons, generally. It's either too slow, and the pace of change is fast enough that organizations need to pick up their pace in order to be competitive. So it's too slow, it's too hard, and that is just the degree of difficulty. I mean, it's a pain in the backside when change comes along, and that's not just for the leaders, but it's for everybody in the organization. Then so it's too slow, too hard, and the last one's probably the most important, which is it's too ineffective. I mean, all the statistics that you can read going back 30 years tell you that 70% of the change efforts that organizations undertake fall short of whatever their goals are that they're trying to achieve. And so if what you're doing doesn't work, those are all three good reasons to come to me and that my clients do.
Great. So today we'll be talking about change and change throughout organizations. And, I have to say that, we as Project Genetics, we help companies implement their strategic projects, which of course has change to it. And
Yep.
When I look at how companies approach project budgets, when they get the price tag, I feel the first thing they cut out is change management. What are your thoughts
Training,
around?
maybe training
Yep.
first, Jana, then quickly change management.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts? Like, what does that do to adoption and to the success of the project from your perspective?
Yeah, well, that's not foreign to me. But I think I have, with the approach that I take, it's a pretty solid comeback, which is not to argue with these people. They've got limited resources and they need to spend them wisely. And by using this approach that I've developed called Leverage Change, the subtitle to this book that I just finished is called 8 Ways to Achieve Faster, Easier, Better Results. And so because you use this approach, faster, easier, better results means it's also cheaper from a resource standpoint. So there's less time, money, and energy spent spinning your wheels and trying to figure out how to get moving. And this whole notion of getting people on board that takes time and money. These are things that you don't have to bother with when you take a leverage change approach because it's built in. It comes for free. There was a guy, Stuart Kaufman, who used to talk about that order comes for free in the universe, that in fact, what we need to do is recognize the order that's already there. It's not like we have to create it. It's already present. And I think the same is true with change and this approach that I'm talking about, is that buy-in, commitment, alignment, all of these things that people spend a lot of time, money, and energy on, they come for free with this approach. And the benefit of it is that you can take those resources, those precious resources that leaders are worried about when it comes to spending money on change management, and invest them in the products and services and innovation and R&D and those other things that make your business hum. So I am, a little unpopular maybe in the change management world by saying I think it's good that they protect those assets. And I think that there are ways to go about change that make it possible to be able to make change faster, easier, and better. And that then should take less money.
So before we get into that, because I want to hear the details around that, let's first set the stage a little and talk about what happens to organizations when they don't do change well. What happens to it, regardless if they don't spend money, they do spend money. If they don't do change well, what will happen to the success of that organization?
Horrible things, Jana. Horrible things. I'm a change management guy, so I've got a long list of these. But I mean, internally and externally, there are costs. And some of these are hidden and you won't see them for a while. But, before we got started, I was talking about recruitment and retention and saying that, your people, your talent, people are talking about a talent war now. And, you do change poorly and people will exit your organization. They will find one that is a better place to live and to work. And that has to do with change. It also has to do with the underlying culture of the organization. And so when you do change well, you keep your talent. You also end up making good decisions around the strategy of products and services that you offer your marketplace and your customers. And you can implement the decisions that you make. I mean, a lot of times smart decisions get made and they get left on the shelf. I mean, the number of clients that I've seen who talk about a binder on the shelf, it's a mile long. And the reason is because implementation falls short. So when you're bringing change about effectively, it's not just bringing the change about, but it's really about sustaining those changes over time. And I talk about Teflon change. And Teflon change is when you bring something about, but it doesn't stick over the long haul. So for 3 or 6 months, it may look like you've been successful and things are working out well and, people are celebrating. But when it comes to a year or two down the road, you find you're in the same mess again. And so from a strategic standpoint, there are a lot of costs as well. And then there are things where you lose opportunity costs. So there are things that you could be doing with those resources that you spend on change, and that if they're wasted, they're not available for other things, whether that's compensation, whether that's innovation, whether that has to do with your production processes, your sales organization, all of these things that you could be putting money into. It's gone down the money pit of your change effort, and it's not available for these other things that are valuable contributors to the success of your business.
So having a focus on change is important, and not only that, focusing on making that change stick, because what's the point of undergoing that project if it's not going to stick? You won't get your ROI. So the typical approach from what I've seen in the industry to change is a lot about, well, let's go figure out all the stakeholders are, who's all impacted it, what are their current needs, what are their current feelings about this, and then you take them on the change journey. And like you said before, we've put a lot of focus on buy-in and getting them through that change curve over the fear. But you're saying, when that takes a lot of money to do all that, because it takes a lot of attention and a lot of hand holding and a lot of workshops and a lot of like feel good, let's get rah, this is great for our organization. So you're saying you have ways to make it faster and cheaper. So I am all ears on
Right.
how we do that.
You and your listeners are taking out a pad of paper right now, I'm sure, Jana. So let me give you a couple of these levers. And the levers, I called this book Leverage Change because leverage is about getting more done with less. And that's both on the hassle factor side, less, but also, as I said earlier, on the resource side. So this all goes back to a guy named Archimedes. You may, or your listeners may have heard of him. He was a 3rd century Greek mathematician, BC, why am I talking about a guy who was a Greek mathematician? Well, he was famous for describing leverage by saying, give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and single-handed I shall move the world. And so he had all these competitions. They used to try and move boulders, was the story. And he would sit on the sidelines and wait. He was a slight man. He was a mathematician, right? He didn't work out much. And then he would wait until nobody could move the boulder, and then he would take a lever. And by using that lever, he had superhuman strength. So levers are about superhuman strength in the arena of change and moving your world. So one of them is, most people, when they talk about change, they deal with change. That's the topic, right? They focus on change. They try and figure out how to do it well. All of that is well and good, except it brings about anxiety and frustration. People get nervous. Productivity suffers. So when you deal with change, there are two ways to address this typically. One is do less change, right? Put less on people's plates. And that would be a great solution, except if the changes are needed. And for most organizations, they're not making changes that aren't needed. They're making changes that are needed. So option one, not a good choice. Option two, which is the preferred mode, is push harder, right? So we end up getting change pushed down people's throats, whether they're capable of digesting it or not. It just gets pushed and pushed and pushed. And that's where you end up with change fatigue, where people just like wave a white flag and they give up, right? Or they rebel. And that can be, externally so you see it, but most of the time it's underground. They rebel, but you don't notice that it's happening until you look around and you say, oh, none of this work got done. What happened? Well, there was a rebellion. So what I do is I also talk about what not to change. And I get my clients focused on what I call continuity. And I'm not going to ignore what needs to be different, but it's like looking at half of reality. The other side of the coin of change is continuity. And if I can start to focus on all those things that are going to stay the same, I get more confidence, I get more conviction, I get more clarity, because not everything is going to change. Even in the most significant change efforts, more things stay the same than change. So if I can start to pay attention, I get clients like pulling out a flip chart, writing down all the changes, and then getting another flip chart out and writing down all the things that aren't going to change, that are going to continue. And the list of continue is always longer. And by paying attention to that, you also don't drop the ball. A lot of times when change comes about, people drop the ball on the things that they were doing well in the first place, because everybody focuses on what needs to be different and they let go of what they've done well in the past. So this pay attention to continuity is one of the ways, and all of these levers are paradigm shifts. None of them cost anything. It doesn't cost anything to pay attention to continuity, right? It's not going to take any of your budget or your head count or anything. It's a paradigm. It's a way of seeing the world. One other one that I'll mention has to do with speed. So when change is too slow, and if there are any leaders listening, they would say, yes, that's me, because the pace of change has everything to do with the success of change. So when change is too slow, what the lever says is think and act as if the future were now. And what do I mean by that? Typically, when we think of the future, it's something that's going to occur at a later point in time. So we're in the present, and then we will wait for that future to unfold. And when it arrives, we'll arrive with it. So if I have a vision 2025, success looks like achieving it in 2025. That's my expectation. Well, if you think and act as if the future were now, what that's saying is take some picture of that future that you prefer, whatever it may be, and start to think and act as if that future were alive and well today, here, right now. And in the book, I have a story about a leader and a direct report. And this direct report was on the verge of getting fired. It was a new hire. They weren't working out. The team was having issues with them. Deliverables weren't being put in on time, on budget. There were all kinds of problems with this person, and they were about ready to fire him. And I came in and I talked to the leader, and I introduced this concept of think and act as if the future were now. And I said, so how do we apply this to this problem employee, right? And what we decided was that this leader was going to think and act as if that future valuable contributor to the team was here and now today, that problem employee actually was the solution to most of the problems on the team. And we brought that direct report into the leader's office, and we explained this concept to them. When they came in the office, they thought they were getting fired, right? I mean, they were like really reticent to even walk in the door. And they heard this story and they were like, is this for real? Is there some kind of catch here? What's the game? And we said, no, we're going to start treating you as the most valuable member of this team. And so they did. And I came back after lunch and I said, what's different? And they had a list of a few things already that had been different in the interaction between the leader and this person. And I came at the end of the day and I talked to members of the team and they said, well, this guy, he had some ideas in this meeting. He started to contribute. We didn't always agree with his ideas, but he felt like more of a member of the team. So as they thought and acted as if he were a valuable contributor, they began to see him as a valuable contributor, and his behavior changed and their perceptions of his behavior changed. Now, that's just a one-on-one situation, but the same thing is true if I have a whole organization thinking and acting as if the future were now. Change happens faster. That future happens here and now rather than waiting for it. And that line between the present and the future gets a little blurry. I mean, if I'm thinking and acting that way, is the future happening now or am I supposed to wait for it? And as soon as you ask that question, you're winning the game because change is happening faster. And when people look left and right, what they see is people thinking and acting differently in line with whether it's a more participative culture or whether they have a new operating practice. But as you look left and right, your confidence, what I call the believability index, increases significantly because I can't say change isn't happening. I mean, I look next to me and it is happening. So it's easier for me to get on board and support it because I don't have to worry, is it just another line from senior managers? It's like taking hold all around me.
So how do you do that though, when I guess the change is dependent upon some sort of, technology transformation, right? A lot of these organizations are going under what they call a digital transformation, which means they're upheaving their ERP system, their sales system like Salesforce, or et cetera. And so all of those things are going to have to, hopefully, if they're doing more than just plugging in technology, they're reviewing processes and they're saying, how can we look at these processes and make them better? So how do you live that change now? When you're dependent on the solution implementation?
Yeah, so this is not a be-all, end-all solution. So if you have a technology implementation and you've got an ERP coming in, until that technology gets installed, you can't use the technology. So, I'll give you that. But what I won't give you is the behaviors and the processes that need to change when that technology gets implemented. So as much of that you can implement immediately, you do. I mean, you can't mess with the time space reality and say, well, we're going to have this technology, and no, you get that piece when you get it. But the question is, how much can you get done on your own before that technology comes into play and actually gets implemented? And my clients have found a lot more than they expected, because a lot of things that happen to do with digitalization and these other things are cultural and their business practices. So if I'm supposed to be partnering more with a particular, if I'm sales and I'm supposed to be working closer with marketing when this ERP system comes online, I don't have to wait for that. I can start that relationship here and now, and I can start negotiating the relationship of the future. Who's going to do what support is going to be there. A lot of times accountability gets paid attention to, but support doesn't. What support do people need to fulfill the accountabilities they're given? So these negotiations that typically would happen downstream, I mean, they would happen from a problem standpoint. It's like when the ball gets dropped, then somebody looks around and says, wait a minute, what's the role that we're supposed to have and who's supposed to be doing this? Or it starts getting implemented as the technology comes on board. I'm talking about as soon as you know it's coming, you start building that vision of what better looks like. And then as much of that vision as you can start implementing, those are all wins. Those are like going to Vegas and pulling winnings off the table early. You're pulling winnings before anybody else even gets to the table. And you can start betting with what I call house money, because those early winnings give me more money to invest, but it's like safe money. I've already put my stash away and I'm now playing with my early winnings. And there are early winnings all over the place when you start thinking and acting as if the future were now.
So I want to give you an example. We went through a situation where a client implemented a CRM, and it took more steps to do the job in the CRM, which in the long run for the organization was going to end up being valuable, right? Because of it was going to make it more efficient. It was going to speed up the holistic process. But at the beginning, it was slower. And so what they found were people were going and using they could skip the CRM and go directly to the ERP and do the work in there and just skip that whole front end process. What do you, how do you assess that? Like if that client were to come into you now and say, hey, we have this, adoption problem, like how do you take them through that assessment of what the problem is?
Yeah. So one of the other levers that we deal with, Jana, has to do with people struggling with asking this question, what's in it for me? Right. And clients call this WIFM. I mean, like people love acronyms, and WIFM, you could say that anywhere in the world and everybody would know what we're talking about. What's in it for me? How am I going to get a benefit out of this change? And right now, this WIFM doesn't look like a good equation for me, because now I'm doing extra steps. It's taking me extra long. And I know a back door that I can get my work done faster. And why shouldn't I take it? Well, the problem dealing with WIFM is that people try and convince individuals what the reason is they should change. Now, they do it one of two ways. One is they try and scare them, right? So here's your burning platform and your case for change. And if we don't make these changes, this is what it's going to cost us. Well, I don't think that's necessary, nor is it necessary to try and bribe people. And so you say to them, well, look, when it's better down the road, this is what's going to be in your life. And, you shouldn't worry about yourself. So I go to the individual and I try and convince them, but I'm going into the past. I'm going into the history to try and convince them it's going to be different. Instead of looking at the individual and looking back, what the levers say is to look at the collective and look forward. So the lever for this is develop a future people want to call their own. And in doing this, what that means is that you've got to get people engaged in creating that collective future. And if I develop a future that I want to call my own, if I'm part of that, and if I'm part of it, I've got to look at the whole future for the whole company. I have to start thinking as a senior executive, as a CEO of the company, and everybody needs to start thinking that way, because it's not just what's good for me, like you said, but what's good for the whole. And when I get that picture that I want to call my own, now I've already solved that problem of what's in it for me. I'm not worried about what's in it for me. I already see what's in it for me because I've created that future, and it's motivating, it's compelling, it's something where my voice was heard. And developing that future isn't simple. It doesn't mean like, oh, well, we'll get on high, we'll bring the commandments down, and this is the way thou shalt be. I don't believe that change happens that way. What we need to do is get out and listen to people, and in particular, listen to the troublemakers. So these are the people who, they're raising the one more issue. They're asking one more question. That, they're like, Eeyores. They're the Eeyores of organizations. And what I believe is that troublemaking is in the eye of the beholder. If I have you, Jana, being a troublemaker, you tend to cause trouble. If I see you as a strategic partner who's paying attention to information that I'm not, then you tend to add more value. So you got to learn to love your troublemakers. And in this way of developing a future people want to call their own, these troublemakers raise a bunch of issues. Well, those are gifts. You've got to say thank you. And could you say more? I talk about this in the book. I say there's 4 magic words. Could you say more? And if leaders use that more, they would learn from people in their organization, somebody covering their backside, looking for something that they're not, noticing something that they're not paying attention to. And when I develop that future, I've got to listen to these, quote, troublemakers, or who I used to think of as troublemakers. But once I get that future, the what's in it for me goes away. So this is not ignoring reality. This is reframing reality.
So, the step beyond just the troublemakers, because I agree, the people who are like, I've seen them on the project as well, is where they're always bringing up concerns. And you're right, a lot of times their concerns turn into something that was worth paying attention to, or even just a gap in training. But regardless, it's something, there was something missing. What about the people, though, who are actively advocating against the change? Who are out there saying, no, we shouldn't do this. And maybe they're being covert about it. They're out there to try to make whatever the initiative is fail. What do you do with those people?
Okay. Love them more. Okay. Because I think there are evil people in the world. There are people whose sole motivation is to sabotage, and that number is few and far between in organizations. I don't think that there are a lot of evil people trying to screw up their future and everybody else's. They're not out there. The boogeyman largely does not exist. So these people, the reason they're doing this covertly is because they have to. It's because I, as a leader, have created a culture where people don't feel safe to be able to bring their issues up. And that's on me. So if I could create an organization where people feel free, genuinely free to raise concerns and issues, once people get their voice heard, my experience has been they're okay most times with the way things go if they've been heard. It's the times when we ignore them or we shunt them or we push them into a corner or they get punished in some way. You bring up an issue and the leader in the meeting slaps you down. Now, it could take any form of, I don't know. I had a professor in college and we were reading Huck Finn. Now, everybody reads Huck Finn in high school and college, right? Everybody's read it, and it's been dissected every which way to say, what's the meaning of this? What was the message there? What is the learning here? Well, I had this professor in college, and we were reading Huck Finn. It was like the 8th time I'd read it. And they said, well, what's Huck trying to do here on page 156 or whatever it was? And some poor sap raised his hand, and he said, well, I think Huck was trying to do this. Now, there are probably doctoral dissertations in agreement with what he said about what Huck meant, right? It's been analyzed enough. Somebody wrote that thesis. Well, the professor looked at this guy, looked away, and he said, any other ideas? Now, that is a way you can punish somebody in a meeting by not saying a word. So there are a lot of strategies to make sure that people shut up or that people agree with what a leader is saying. And when people agree too quickly to what a leader is saying is when you are in the most danger, because you can't be that right all the time. And somebody has to challenge the status quo, even from a devil's advocate standpoint. So this whole issue around, what do you do with the worst troublemakers is you love them more. You create more space for those people, and everybody else in the organization, when they see that it's okay to say something that isn't what the leader believes, you're going to end up with a lot more mischief in the early going, especially if people have been sandbagging this stuff for a while and they're like, look, I'm not sticking my head up because the last guy this happened to, right, he's no longer here. So if it's not safe, but after that first deluge of people saying, wait a minute, if they're going to talk, I'm going to talk, then you get into an organization where things get raised naturally, easily, they get addressed. It becomes the kind of place that people want to call their own. It becomes a future people want to call their own. And so, like I said, I think the evil quotient in organizations is overblown. And if you're having that much trouble with that many people in your organization, then you got to look in the mirror and you got to say, what am I doing that's creating this in the organization? And what can I do to start lessening that effect? Because we create our own resistance without even knowing it most of the time.
Yeah. Well, and so that kind of makes me think about this other group. So what about, so you've got the people who are we talked about before, who are cautiously resisting, and we can spend time with them and show them the way. We have the active resistors. You love them more. What about the people who are just disengaged? So they know the
Right.
change is coming. It's going to impact them. But then, they're the ones who, once, let's say it's a technology, the solution goes live and they go, oh, this doesn't work for us. But it wasn't that they weren't included. They just chose not to engage. What are your thoughts around that group
All
of
right.
people?
So I think that apathy is worse than resistance, right? Because apathy, you can't channel apathy. I mean, with resistance, you could take that energy and focus it in positive and productive ways. When people are apathetic, they're like waiting and saying, this too shall pass. I've seen change around here, and, eventually things will go back to the way that they've been. And there you have it. Well, when people are apathetic, there's a reason they're apathetic. And so I've got an ebook that I was going to tell your listeners about on my website. It's called 27 Ways to Achieve Faster, Easier, Better Results Immediately. And it gives you 3 or 4 ideas for how to implement these levers, each lever, right away. So in this case, you've got a situation where you've got somebody who's apathetic. Go talk to them. Name the resistance, right? What is it that isn't energizing to you about what we're trying to do here? Don't try and get them on board. Don't rah. Don't get into this whole thing, which is your issue, but figure out what's their issue. Why is it that they're not engaged? I mean, there's something that I can do. You can even ask these people, what could I do to engage you further? You don't have to make them wrong. You don't have to make them bad. You don't have to embarrass them, but you can look and say, what can we do to further build engagement in this effort? And what I found is a lot of times those people who are least engaged become your biggest zealots when they're treated with respect and dignity, when they're not made wrong for whatever it is. And the worst thing you can do is try and guess why they're apathetic. We have no idea, right? We have no idea what it is. And different people may have no energy for different reasons. Some of it could even be historical. It happened, people live with these things that happened 5, 7, 10 years ago, the way they were treated by somebody, and they still remember that. And they still associate it with this organization, even if that person retired years ago. So listening to these people's stories and really understanding what is it, and then you recruit them to say, what could we do to make this more engaging? Well, now you got them coming around to the other side of the table. You're no longer trying to fight them, but you've got a teammate that you're recruiting to help you think through an issue, which frankly, it's not only their issue. There are a lot of people who are disengaged in organizations today. So the more people that you can get thinking about how to engage themselves in this process, the better off you're going to do. And there's a theme cutting through all the things that we're talking about here. And it has to do with paying attention to what people can teach you and help you collaborate in getting change done well. All of the stories that I'm telling you are about reaching out and listening to people, and then importantly, acting on what you heard. And if you can't act on it, then you got to treat them like an adult and say, well, you can't do that. We don't have money to do that right now. So that's not a reasonable solution. We have to work within these constraints to figure out how to move this ball down the field. And as long as you're honest about those constraints on the front end, is a bad news move to throw constraints in after the fact, right? It's like, no, well, that's not going to work for this reason. That's not going to work for this reason. All you're doing is chipping away at trust. It's like, well, if you would have told me at the beginning, I wouldn't have had such an uninformed, right, idea that appears stupid, right? I don't like feeling unwise. People love to feel smart. And so if you give them the information that's called reality, that people in senior positions often have more of, then you say, well, let's work on this together. You'll find that you got more teammates than you thought you did.
Mhm. So there's two other. I kind of found this direction interesting where we're talking about different actors within the change, and there's two others that I wanted to ask your opinion on. What about the first one is what about the people who are like, we've tried it before and it doesn't work? Like we hear this a lot when we go in and do an agile transformation, right? Because somebody's tried to put in agile before
Right.
and no, they didn't do all the change management associated with it, and then it failed. So this organization we ended up helping had done it 6 times. So when we got there, it was like, well, this isn't going to work. It always fails. What are your suggestions around that group of people?
I'm going to sound like a bit of a broken record, but at least I'm consistent.
Mhm.
So learn from them. Again, there are reasons why it's screwed up in the past. And these people are experts on how it's screwed up in the past. I mean, they've probably got a PhD in how to do agile poorly. And so figuring out how to extract that information, how to create a real learning organization. One of the other levers deals with people not knowing enough to make good decisions. Mostly we think of that as people in the organization. Here, it could be the people coming in trying to help them become a more agile organization, and they don't know enough to make good decisions. So each organization's got its own DNA, I believe, and it needs to be treated with its unique circumstances. So create a common database is one of the levers, and it says we've got to educate each other about the business, about the change effort, about what an agile organization is, and about what happened last time that didn't work. And what I think you'll find is not everything was broken, right? There are a few things in each of those situations where it didn't get done well. And those were key elements that when done poorly, they're like dominoes and they fall so that the whole effort falls down. And if we got those few things right, those dominoes would stand up. And it could be, A, B, and C were wrong the first time. And then the second time, A, B, and C were right, but X, Y, and Z got screwed up. So it's like you start playing the alphabet game. It's like, well, you had 26 letters. And so how many mistakes could have been made? There's a lot. But the issue is, what do we know about how to do it well? And I'll tell you, if you have perfected how to screw it up, you are a genius in how to make it work well.
Good answer.
I love these questions, Jana. These are the best questions I've gotten on one of these conversations. It's like, wait a minute, let me throw another curveball and see if we can get this one. So keep bringing them on.
Yep, I got one more. So I observed an organization that wanted to change. So it had multiple business units, and then it had a parent company. And the parent company made the decision that they wanted the business units to come together and do some joint selling because the products were complementary, right? So we could go in and offer a client a better solution because I'm bringing my sister company along, et cetera. So, somebody high up in their organization was like, no, this isn't going to work. And no, I don't think this is the right decision. And no. And so I guess where I'm saying is that the people it's not about like the decision's been made and they won't even engage in how to implement it the right way because they're like, no, this is the wrong decision. So I don't support it.
Right. So I've got several responses to this one. Early on in my consulting career, I spent a lot of time working at Ford. And they had a saying at Ford because they were trying to create a more participative culture. And so there was this global effort to do so. This is back like when quality circles were getting started. So this is a while ago. And they had a saying, they said, the people will change or the people will change.
Yep.
Okay. So if you get somebody at a very senior level who, despite your best efforts, despite the listening that you do, the understanding that you do, I am not at the end of the day a softie. What I am is an effectiveness guy. So at the end of the day, what I want on my tombstone is to say it worked, right? As long as it's morally and legally correct, it worked. So, and sometimes these people aren't in the right positions. And if you get somebody who the whole corporation, the whole enterprise is saying, we're going to go to the left, and this individual is saying, no, I'm going right, then maybe they're not the right person to be going anywhere with this organization. So that's one response, right? The other one is to take a look and see where there are opportunities and see what is it about this joint selling, right? This joint offering that this person is resisting. So is it something that has to do with compensation? Is it something that has to do with them feeling like their product won't be represented well? Like, what's at the bottom? What's the root cause? You know, like there's 5 whys that they talk about with the quality movement. It's like, what is behind this? And if we can figure that out, maybe we can move forward together. The other thing about that is that you can, you know, there's one of the levers called start with impact, follow the energy. And what this says is you don't have to start. If you're going to make some change, you don't have to start at the top and you don't have to make it corporate wide. You start where you can make a difference, right? So if you pick up a book on change, they're going to tell you get senior leader alignment, dominant coalition. There's all kinds of names that get put to it. But basically, they're saying there's one way to do this. And this is the answer. And from a leverage change standpoint, what we're looking for is the way that's going to work, right? So the way that it works is you start where you can make a difference. So it might be that you put out a probe, take a small element of your business and say, let's go try it here and let's see how it works. And I'm not talking about like a pilot study, because pilot studies always like they get extra resources, they get extra attention. By the time you're done setting up a pilot study, it's like, you know, Joseph in the, you know, coat, you know, it's like it's not normal behavior anymore for that much resources and that much support to get put on a daily basis into the organization. So you've got to make this real and then send people out and see how it goes. And then let the data speak for the process that you're trying to improve. It's like at the end of the day, if it works, it's very difficult to argue against that. And again, I do believe most people want what's best for the whole. Not everybody, which is why some people need to change. But when you can start to look at real data, real customer satisfaction, real sales figures, then you're smarter about how to make decisions. And it's harder to argue with good data. And it may be that this individual actually knows that it's not going to work and it doesn't work for some reason. And changes need to be made in how you're going about doing this. Just because it's one person doesn't mean they're wrong. This is not majority rules. This is good answers rule. Yeah. And finding out what a good answer is sometimes takes you going out into the field and trying it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, this has been a fun conversation, Jake. Before we leave, what are the top 3 tips you might provide to an organization to help them avoid a mortality event when it comes to change?
Okay. Well, one of them is a big fat fastball down the middle, right? So I can swing hard at this one, which is listen, right? Can you say more when you find the hairs going up on the back of your neck and you're like, I can't stand this person, right? Shut up. Okay. That's when you got to grit your teeth and say, can you say more? So really listening to people, right? Another one is encourage dissent. Because if you encourage dissent, you make it a safe place for people to bring strategic information to the table that otherwise is going to be missing. And, you know, it's like, if I gave you a choice and said, well, would you rather make an informed decision or an uninformed decision? That's like not even a decision to make. It's not even a choice. So getting more data on the table is going to be helpful. And the third thing that I would recommend is embrace change. It's coming anyway. It's happening. It's here. It's now. So become friends with it. Go out, get my book. No, go out and figure out how to do it well, because it's not going anywhere. I mean, I just wrote this article, and I said, every 10 years, there's another futurist that tells us that there's going to be more change in the next 10 years than in the previous 100. And then in 10 years, there's another futurist who's telling us the same thing. So it's not going to stop. So why not get really good at it, embrace it, figure out for your organization what's the best way to make it happen, learn from your past mistakes, and implement better solutions the next time. All of that is about saying, if I embrace it, then I need to do it well. Become a change-able organization. Make it a core competence in your business that you're better at change than any of your competitors. And then it doesn't matter what gets thrown your way, whether it's new technology, new trends, new regulations, new customer demands. It doesn't matter what it is, because change becomes something that you love, because it's a competitive advantage for you. You'll change faster and better and easier than your competition. That's number 3.
No, I like that. I like that a lot. I love change, so I really like number 3. So, Jake, how do people get in contact with you? How do they find your book? How do people find where you are?
Sure. So the best thing is come to my website. It's jakejacobsconsulting.com. And there's that ebook. It's a free download, and it'll give you 27 ways to take these levers and put them to use for you immediately, like straight away. You don't even have to finish the ebook to get value out of it, because I am a big believer in results. And so getting results and getting them faster, easier, and better is what this book is all about. And you can get the book, you can get it on Amazon, you can get it from your local bookstore, you can get it from independent bookstores. It's on Audible, you can get it soft copy, hard copy. But when you get it, what I encourage you to do is go test it. Go use what's in the book and prove to yourself whether it's worth it. Because I've got a long list of organizations that I've worked with over the past 35 years. And there've been big wins, medium wins, small wins. It doesn't matter, but it all goes in the right-hand column, because when you do change well, you do business well.
That's great. Thank you so much for being a guest today, Jake. And to our listeners, thank you so much for being here. And until next time, keep your organizations healthy.
Thanks so much.